begin by using some technology, given that this is a space where we care about not just art, but technology. So I'll first acknowledge that we are on First Nation land. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the land of the Turrbal and Yugara people and pay my respects to elders past and present, as well as anyone in this room who may be a First Nations person, because we are here on this land where we have tens of thousands of years of history of storytelling and art and technology and humanity. So it's important for us to acknowledge that, and Indigenous people as our first scientists and technologists as well. So the panel today will be about AI street art collaborations and the artworks that have taken place from them. I'm going to do a more of a casual introduction to everyone. Do you mind if I just first name you all to everyone? But there are, professors, doctors here, and who's the artist, who's the researcher? We don't know. They all look the same. So we have Sue Keay, who is the director of the Queensland AI Hub, and is also a very accomplished researcher and maker of science. She makes it happen when it comes to at the academic level and in industry. So Sue has been behind launching the Queensland AI Hub. Welcome, Sue. And then put your hand up if you're an artist and you're on the panel. I should, yep. So I'll introduce our artists. We have Damien here, who was our first collaboration. We also have Emily and we have Maddie here, who are two of our other artists from two of our other collaborations. And then put your hand up if you're an AI researcher. If you're a researcher using AI in any way, Felipe, we've got Scott, and here we've got Janet. So this is our panel, but I thought I'd start by giving the mic to Sue to introduce what the AI Hub is and why you were interested in street art.
Thanks, Lee. So the Queensland AI Hub was started by a consortium of local AI companies, and it's a well-kept secret that Brisbane is actually quite a technology hub. We develop about 60% of the world's mining software, for example, but we also have a surprising strength in artificial intelligence. And there was quite a strong Queensland AI community that had developed, and they just started up as a meetup group and quickly got almost 3,000 members. And at that stage, the Office of the Queensland Chief Entrepreneur started paying attention and going, well, what's going on? Why do we have such a seemingly large amount of interest in artificial intelligence here in Queensland? And based on that, they discovered that there is actually a number of companies here developing artificial intelligence technologies, and that perhaps we should be paying more attention. So the Queensland Government put forward a tender to create the Queensland AI Hub, and our purpose is to help support the development of Queensland's AI community, to help encourage our government departments and our corporates, our just everyday businesses to apply artificial intelligence, and wherever possible to link them in with the local capability who is already developing these technologies, right just down the street, and really to raise the profile of the sort of work that we're doing in artificial intelligence here, so that people see it as Queensland as a place where they would want to be able to be part of the artificial intelligence scene, and where we can encourage investment and hopefully try and make sure that we're actually developing these technologies here in Australia rather than relying on importing all of these technologies. So that's the reason the Queensland AI Hub formed. And one of the key challenges for us is just those two words, artificial intelligence. I mean, you might have even noticed that when Lee asked who the AI researchers were, at least two of the panel were a bit hesitant to identify in that way. And that's because artificial intelligence comes with its own history and baggage, and people who apply artificial intelligence might not see themselves as artificial intelligence researchers. They might see themselves as researchers who apply those technologies, and that's all fine. But I think, at the end of the day, what matters is that we've got a good opportunity here in Queensland to take advantage of all of this local capability and interest, and actually, control our own future where artificial intelligence technologies are concerned, rather than being reliant on other nations. And an important element of that, though, is actually having conversations about artificial intelligence, demystifying it, making it a little bit less scary, because we all get influenced by what we see in movies and popular culture about artificial intelligence. Sadly, we're nowhere near the stage that we see in the movies of having robots that are, extremely capable and can open doors and go up and down stairs. Even the most basic tasks are, still beyond them. But we watch movies and we think that they have these superhuman, amazing capabilities. Having said that, I think there are a lot of opportunities for us with these technologies, but people need to understand how they operate. And we were so lucky that I brought on Shelley Thomas as the Hub's communication specialist, and she knew that Lee was here in Brisbane, and Lee has quite a great
past.
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to say that. No, I was going to say, a great reputation in being able to help demystify science, and had started this with an initiative down in Canberra where she brought scientists and street artists together. And Shelley, I guess, joined the dots and went, well, we've got Lee Constable here in Brisbane. Why don't we bring artificial intelligence and street art together? And then, of course, we got in the loop with Lincoln, because we, discovered that Brisbane has its own street art festival, and we thought, well, can we try and bring these things together and actually start people having conversations about artificial intelligence? Because I think people need to feel comfortable about engaging in those conversations and having an opinion. I think it's very important that everyone's actually, an activist on their own behalf in terms of how these technologies are applied and what you feel comfortable with and what you don't feel comfortable with. But I guess shying away from the conversation doesn't really help anybody. And doing this collaboration with Brisbane Street Art Festival is a great opportunity for us to start that conversation. So, yeah, that's really it. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great introduction to the whole concept, and I think you've touched on a few things there when it comes to artificial intelligence and perceptions, and also that blocking people out of the conversation when it comes to any technology or science has not been a good thing for either the community or the research and its application. So basically the concept, to bring you all up to speed, is something that started when I was a master's student in science communication. So I have a background in arts and science, not visual arts, sociology and social science, as well as theatre. And I kind of did a master's student project where I introduced scientists from the Canberra community to street artists in the Canberra community. And Sue just said, oh, we discovered that Brisbane has a street art festival. I think quite often it's a surprise on both ends. Oh, we do artificial intelligence here, or we do that research here and that research. And there's communities here that don't know each other exist, let alone be able to have a conversation and communicate with each other. So we had 3 consecutive years of Science Meets Street Art in Canberra, with public spaces where street artists would be paired with a scientist. They would have conversations, often over coffee, sometimes by email as well, where the scientists would start to explain their research. They'd start to explain what they do. Sometimes they'd go into that like a bull at a gate, thinking, yes, everyone's going to understand exactly what I'm saying, and then get a shock when they find out that they need to communicate in different ways. And the street artists was bringing to the conversation their own way of communicating, their own expertise and their own ideas about the research. And quite often that led to a concrete meeting in the middle, because you have to have this actual physical wall that's painted. And then, of course, the community can see that take shape and can ask questions, can read about the science behind it and things like that. So we did that for 3 years. And now that I'm in Brisbane, it's really awesome to see these collaborations take place when it comes to artificial intelligence. So for the artists, I've just had a chat to all of you at different times about your perceptions. I was wondering if some of the artists, maybe you want to start, Damien, because you were the first. You were asked to come and do the initial collaboration between a researcher and a street artist. What was your reaction to that, or what was your perception going in of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, well, I knew very little about artificial intelligence, but I was very excited when I was invited to collaborate with Dr. Sally Shrapnel. Within my arts practice and my artwork, I like to use unusual pairings and juxtaposition of subject matter. So I find that visually exciting, and the idea of being able to collaborate exciting also. But in terms of going with knowledge in AI, I was really a blank canvas myself.
Yeah, and how about the other artists? Would you like to add to what it was like when you were first thinking about AI and what that could mean, let alone what that could mean for your art? Did either of you have a...
I'll flash you for it. I think we were chatting earlier about shared preconceptions that we had. So when I first met with Felipe, my understanding of artificial intelligence was very little. And the thoughts that I had in how it could play into an artwork, again, like Damien, was very much blank canvas, like zero expectation. But I think that was a really nice way to enter it, because then it meant that there was maximum potential in what you could do.
Yeah, likewise. Likewise for me, I just went in without any expectations. I think what I thought of, honestly, and I'm sure a lot of people experience the kind of like common narrative out there about AI being like robots and your consciousness getting downloaded into the ether, and like, you know, all of these horror stories and social media algorithms. So I kind of just tried to like put that all aside and really be open to understanding a different perspective and broadening my understanding and realizing actually how beneficial a lot of this is, especially in the scientific community, and how it is going to in turn like benefit us as well.
Yeah, and I will go to each of you as researchers for you to give a little summary of how you use AI and how that's played out in the artworks. But firstly, Damien, your artwork is now in the space, in the AI hub, so it's one of the first things you see when you walk into the space. I know you had a lot of ethical questions about AI, and that those kind of questions about how it's used and things like that came about in your conversation with Sally Shrapnel, the researcher who you collaborated with. How did you navigate that conversation, and what actually came out from that conversation in your work?
Yeah, so when I started, like I said, I had little knowledge on AI, except for probably the things that you do see in movies and the kind of the negative connotations. But I would probably, if I was to do the collaboration again tomorrow, it would be really different. And that's part of just the learning that takes place through this kind of process. But yeah, I just spent a lot of time up north in remote Arnhem Land working with people still connected to a continual culture of ancient technologies, and moved back down to the East Coast, and I'm very much interested in permaculture and, still old world sort of technologies around the land and the seasons. And so to work in something very different to that was unusual for me, probably. So it was a stretch to try to understand, and just find the positives and those sorts of things, I suppose. And the notion that my work is in the hub probably influenced what I created a lot, because it's not out in the general public. So if it was a wall out in the street, the audience would be general public, where I feel within the AI hub, the daily audience is people that are engaged in the process of developing AI. So I wanted to create something that would kind of speak to the creators, and just assure that the technologies are used for good.
Yeah. There are some ever-watching eyes on that wall in the Queensland AI Hub. You should definitely check it out. They're definitely watching over and making sure ethical AI is taking place in this space. Speaking of using AI for good, I want to give each of you, as the researchers, an opportunity to talk about what your application for AI is, especially what we saw or will see in the artwork. So I'll start with you, Janet.
Yeah, so I work with language technologies, a whole variety of different kinds. And I'm not sure I call myself an AI researcher, but definitely language tech is AI type of work. So a couple of different projects, we're working with people living with dementia. And one of the reasons why people have to move from home into care is often because communication breaks down with family. My mother lives with dementia, she lives with my sister, and I don't know if you know what it's like, but if you've been in that situation, you'll recognise that you can answer the same question 3 times with a good, even, nice voice, and the 4th time you're beginning to break down, and the 5th time you're kind of going rigid and turning away, and it's very difficult. And as they lose their ability to communicate and they can't find words, sometimes it's hard for you, or sometimes when you have carers coming in, it's hard for them. So what we're doing is we're working with what is the language bank, what is the knowledge that people have, and how could that be used to support people living at home. So there's lots of different aspects of language there. The other one we're doing, if I can mention a second one, is we're all used to just talking to our phones now. And for some of us, the voice is really good, sometimes not so good. But in Australia, we have over 400 languages, over 100 Indigenous languages. And so we've been creating an open source speech-to-text system, speech recognition system, so that people can create their own voice recognition system. And it's been used for the first time in the first translation system that Purple House out of Alice Springs are creating for Pintupi literature. So that's pretty exciting. Ours is a very tiny part of an Indigenous community that are creating their own translation system, and it's something they've been doing with their data and their language, and we got a chance to plug in one little tiny Lego block. And that's what you need some of the university systems to do, because that Lego block is not something they can necessarily create themselves, but if they collaborate with someone at a university, they can.
And what will people see? The artists that you collaborate with aren't here. They're busy painting. So would you like to give people a sense who might not have been out to the wall of what they'll see as it takes shape and how that reflects your work?
Yeah, so Jan and Scott are out painting at Garden City at the moment. And you go down the escalator and there's this big wall. And we spend a lot of time trying to work out how to really explain the algorithms and the data and the equations that I work with, and it's kind of like we didn't necessarily connect. And then they started saying, visual, concrete. So a lot of what I do you can consider social robots. So we have an interaction between a person and a piece of technology, and the work we do, a lot of it is that interaction. How do you make that interaction work? So what they've done is they've created not a humanoid, which is what we see in the movies, but a different kind of an intelligence. And they create a lot of very beautiful murals with Australian animals. So they've chosen a palm cockatoo, really smart bird that has an amazing way of communicating through drumming. And so what they've done is they've created this young woman, and she has her AI, which is this palm cockatoo in her hand, and it's this wonder of the first time she's interacting with it. It's quite a remarkable concept. And it's not yet finished. I'm dying to see what it's going to look like when it's finished.
Yeah, it's great to see you interact with each other today and kind of share your excitement for the artwork. And that was one of the things they said, even when you were explaining everything about the algorithms and the data and how it all fits together. Even though they didn't necessarily take away from that the concept itself, they said we were just taken by your emotional response and your excitement and how emotional you were about your work. And I think that's something we don't often get to see about research. So I was wondering if we'll go around the circle. If you would both of you like to give a little sense of your work?
Thanks, Lee. I'm Scott Chapman at UQ. I'm actually a crop physiologist, is my original training, but I use AI all the time, and I'm in the fortunate position of working on food and feeding people. So it's very nice to be able to take a very old technology like agriculture, which is at least 10,000 years old. We're thinking it's even older than that, 15, 20,000. And connect it to the newest technologies, and that's the fun bit that Madeline and I got to talk about. And I'll let her talk more about simplicity and complexity because she enjoys talking about that. But we apply it in a lot of different ways, and so a lot of the thinking about AI is in robots or how it's applied. But a lot of what I do is actually about observing. So I use AI to help me observe in better ways. So whether it's a remote sensing from satellite or whether it's a hyperspectral camera on a souped up tractor or a drone or some other technology, I'm trying to work out how to observe more efficiently. And I'm using a lot of AI to help me do that, either extract information or simplify it down to a model and then complexify it back up again into an understanding and predict how a new wheat variety might work under climate change or those kinds of questions. So it's always, it's just another one of part of our toolkit, really, AI, and it accelerates it a lot, but it has just such a massive number of applications. I get to use several sets of them, but some of the things that people might not be aware of are the things like I mentioned this morning. There are farmers in Africa with smartphones who are getting information from satellites to help them make better decisions about how to harvest or fertilise or look after their crops, and even how to take it to market. Because if you've got to spend a day travelling to a market, you want to make sure that you know what the price is going to be and where you should deliver it. And so actually the impacts of AI in Africa are extremely important to us, because Africa needs to feed itself over the next 50 years, another 2 billion people. We can't feed Africa from outside. It has to feed itself. And so a lot of the technologies we get to work on will help them as well as help us. And we have to deal with labour issues and a lot of other things, but AI for us is going to generate more jobs in agriculture, not fewer. And that's, I think, one of the messages that gets missed, actually. We need more people in this area.
Yeah, and decision making is difficult. I'm a farm kid, actually, is originally. Decision making is difficult in any time, let alone in a changing climate where forecasting and things like that, let alone looking at having a perishable crop and knowing which direction you need to travel for a day with that harvest to be able to sell it and things like that. So yeah, it's really interesting application. And how about you, Felipe? How would you like to explain your research and how it uses AI?
Yeah, thank you. I guess for us, it's more it was around demystifying a little bit of the drone technology. I work with UAVs or drones, and there's two concepts of when people think about drones. There's two things. One is the defense application, military, the things that they could do. We've seen some of the use of the technology in war zones. Another aspect is toys. You can buy them on at the shops and then fly them around. We wanted to communicate a little bit more what are the potential uses of the technology and the artificial intelligence that comes with it. So nowadays, drones can be used for many good things, for search and rescue, monitoring animals in vegetation as well, protecting the environment. One particular application that we've been working and collaborating with Emily is on the Great Barrier Reef. So we have flown drones over the Great Barrier Reef. And the Great Barrier Reef, there's some changes and challenges in the Great Barrier Reef in terms of coral bleaching. So when we look at imagery from a drone with some specialized cameras, we can see things that we cannot see with our eyes. So beautiful pictures of the Great Barrier Reef, but there may be something underneath. There may be something on the water in this case to see that there might be some changes happening. So for us is understanding how the technology can inform a scientist and inform decision makers about the changes that are happening in the environment and the Great Barrier Reef. And in particular with the collaboration with Emily is how we can translate that information to the public, to the community. And it's great work at Brisbane Airport. It's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, so the spaces are really interesting. I know Janet mentioned the space that the artwork is in, and so have you, Damien, for your artwork. I wanted to give each of you, Maddie, first an opportunity to talk about the spaces where the artwork is and how that has fed into what you're actually portraying to the world, as well as about the research.
Is it working? Okay. The space that I've been allocated is the RNA Showgrounds, which is like a hub of agriculture in the city, and it's been beautiful to create a new or invite people into the new narrative of how AI's application in agriculture is incredibly beneficial. I went through, I guess, the lens of showing how, in agriculture and in nature, the natural elements evolve with its surroundings and evolve and adapt. And just humans, we also evolve and adapt. And so through the use of AI, we are evolving and adapting our understanding of the environment we live in. So to be invited to paint a mural in a space for the public to kind of access this information and create intrigue about how we can broaden our perspective through the use of AI, and it actually is incredibly beneficial to understanding our environment, that's a really exciting process for me.
Yeah, no, Scott, you also talked about how you felt about the Eka and that being kind of the space where the wall was.
Yeah, it's a pretty special place. So I think I said that I'd first gone there with my grandma when I was about 6. And so I've seen, and my dad's also a horticulturist, so I'm I'm not a farm boy, but I'm a full-on ag scientist, I guess. And it's wonderful to be able to go to that place and imagine, even imagine my grandma getting to see it. She probably could have used AI a bit more often when she was betting on the horses and stuff like that. but it's that junction. I mean, I think Sue's just made it so clear. We need to have a lot more discussion about the fact that AI is a lot more than robots. It's not the robots coming to take your jobs. It's the technologies coming to help us live better lives and also to live more sustainable lives. I mean, Felipe just gave that example, but if we're able to design our agricultural systems more efficiently, then we have less impact as we're able to keep the world fed. And I love Maddie's interpretation of things, because and she did like my slides. We started off in the coffee shop, but we did end up with some slides. But it was good because I love visualizing data myself, and I think that's what you really wanted to see, to go, oh, okay, that's where we go with that stuff. And so I went, oh, well, you can make the data even more beautiful if you make it into a mural, that's for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, data can be beautiful. And Emily, you're obviously the concept of Felipe's research we've just heard, and how that's being applied to the Great Barrier Reef. did you know initially that your space would be at the airport, and how did that play into what you were thinking when you found that out?
So when I was first given the project, I was told that it was going to be at the domestic airport, but I actually hadn't had any idea of. Well, I was told I was going to be connecting with Felipe, but I wasn't given any context on his research. So, yeah, when I first met with him, I think it was in the back of my mind the fact that a lot of what we were connecting on was to do with his drone research, which was gathering data from the Great Barrier Reef. So with human-led drone operations, they were able to collect data in a way that artificial intelligence was capturing like a really detailed and accurate perception of degradation on the Great Barrier Reef, and really pinpointing spots that needed immediate attention versus areas that, I suppose putting it on a bit of a timeline in a way that we've never been able to do before. So my first thought, considering that I was at the airport, was thinking about the fact that typically airports are very much access points for how people experience the environment, and generally if you're travelling to regional Australia, you're going there to kind of marvel at the natural environment. So I thought about the fact that it'd be nice to present something there that stimulates a little bit of deeper thought and promotes a bit of responsibility before boarding the plane. And when you do get to the Great Barrier Reef, it's not about having an attitude of consumption, but more about appreciation and responsibility on how you can take care of it.
I find it fascinating that you've all not only been influenced by your discussions with the researchers, but the spaces that they're in different ways. One of the things that I have marvelled at hearing all the people on all sides of the art-science collaboration is that there's a sense, no matter whether you're the artist or the researcher involved, of, oh, I'm just little old me and they're like amazing and talented and have this thing they can do that I could never do. I hope I can do them justice. And I've heard that from the researcher as well as the street artist in this collaboration. Would any of you like to talk to that kind of feeling and any other emotions that you had when you were going through this kind of collaboration? No? Alrighty.
I can talk about imposter.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard about imposter syndrome, but
Yeah, have you met us? We're artists.
So at the university, probably about 90% of the people have imposter syndrome. And one of my colleagues in quantum physics said to one of his great students coming through who had this massive attack of imposter syndrome, and it gets worse as you progress in your career. You think it's going to get better and it doesn't. Anyway, so this guy was saying, he was trying to counsel his student. And he said, look, there's two types of people. There's researchers or people who have imposter syndrome, and then there's sociopaths. You've got imposter syndrome. Congratulations, you're human. You and your imposter syndrome are welcome here. So it's kind of like, for me, I got this massive attack of, why me? It's kind of like these guys Jan and Scott do the most beautiful work. I had a look online before I met them. And it's kind of like, I get to work with these guys? And then after you get over the imposter syndrome, you think, well, I'm small and universe is big and this is a chance to meet these people. So I don't know if as artists, street artists are supposed to have a lot of confidence in themselves.
Did you know that?
I didn't get the memo. I had the same experience meeting Felipe, but the other way around, where in the back of my mind the whole time I was thinking, oh my God, I have no idea how I'm going to communicate the depth and the complexity of the kind of research that he leads with a simple image, It's like, even though it kind of comes naturally to artists more so than other people, it's still really difficult because it's a language as well. But yeah, I think the more that we connected on it, and you guys would have found this too, each meeting you kind of got a little bit closer and a little bit closer to finding that common language, and eventually it ends up being the imagery as the way to portray that to the public.
What was that common language moment for you, Damien, in your kind of collaboration with Sally?
With Sally's work, I didn't have a lot of visual stimulus to kind of to look at or to take away. So it was going to the meeting and knowing that this AI data was an invisible thing and I left and it was still invisible. I really still had no kind of idea how to bring that to the wall and make the invisible visible. But the point that we did connect on was the notion of the appearance of the first artificial intelligence in ancient Greek literature. So that was a point where we connected, and I had, from the meeting to the painting, a 2-week period, and that stayed with me as the kind of the point that I was able to depart from.
Could you explain that that element to everyone? What was that story?
Yeah, well, it was a part of Homer's Iliad, and the character had created a couple of golden angels that were referred to in the literature, essentially maids, helpers to do any task that he required. So aiding him. But the fact that it was so old, I think, was, and from an ancient mythology, it was something that from my practice and where I would normally look for inspiration, probably, I was able to relate. And so that was the departure point.
Yeah, kind of having something made of a type of metal that was imbued with a special type of intelligence. So when you're hearing all these different perspectives on AI, how does this kind of link in with the hub's hope? You know, are you wanting the community to get involved, or is it just a space for researchers and then it's more like public spaces like this where you talk to the community?
Yeah, I think probably the public spaces are the best point of communication. The hub, you know, it's a great space, but it is still small, really. And, you know, it'd be great for us to be able to have a broader impact than we can have just by people who, you know, can fortuitously come into the space. I think, you know, Damien summed it up really well. You know, he identified very quickly that, you know, the most people who will be using that space are people who are, you know, creating the technologies. And so and I can see that artwork really does speak to creators of AI in a particular way. So I think that, you know, it's just worth trying any different technique, because I think what we've heard from the panel today is that there is quite a divide between the people who are, you know, more on a day-to-day basis involved in the use of AI technologies, and people who, you know, don't have cause to really, you know, think very much about the AI technologies that surround us, and somehow we have to bridge that gap. And really, I just see this as a starting point, and I hope that we find other ways and, you know, similar ways that can have the same impact as this street art project, because it's important. And I think I always feel a bit sad when I hear people say that, you know, they don't understand AI and they don't feel comfortable about talking about it, or they're scared, or you know, they're suspicious of artificial intelligence. I mean, those are all legitimate feelings to have about artificial intelligence, or indeed anything that you don't feel that you're getting enough information and unable to, you know, get the understanding that you would like to have about it. But I suppose even just posing that question, getting people to think about, you know, what AI is and does it influence their lives, and thinking about how they can have a say about those technologies is important, because otherwise, you know, we can't exactly close our borders and, you know, make a decision that we're not going to engage with these technologies, because they are all around us. And I think it's anything that we can do to help illuminate the fact that these things are having an influence on our lives, and that it's important that people feel comfortable to have a say about their use, even if you don't, you know, necessarily understand about how the algorithms are put together. Just to understand that it is being used and to feel comfortable saying something about it is what's the most important thing.
Yeah, because it seems like a two-part collaboration with the street artists and the researchers, but the other part that is super important, and this wouldn't be happening without, is the public, because having this in a public space and having people interacting with and seeing that is so important, because otherwise, you know, how it feels inaccessible physically or otherwise to people. I wanted to throw it out to everyone out there. I've got a million questions always, so I can talk all day, but it's not about me. It is about the public. There you are, the public. We've heard so much about you. So please do stick the hand up, ask questions. You can ask things of the artists about their work. You can ask really technical things or very broad things, you know, nothing personal, if you can help it. But do ask questions, because we're wanting to open this up as more of a conversation. In fact, can I get a show of hands of people who came here because they're primarily interested in art, and then were like, oh, yeah, cool. And who was primarily like interested in the AI even? Yeah, a few. And who's kind of in the middle? Yeah, awesome. That's great. And sometimes these things, people come for the science and get involved in the art, or come for the art and find out a bit about science. And so it's often one, the other, or both. Great. Any questions, feelings, concerns, controversies? No? I've got some. I wanted to ask about the process of collaborating, because we have, you know, Janet, you were on a 45-minute Zoom call. We had Damien, you had, you know, at least a day, but then you had a quick turnaround. How about our two pairs here? Would you like to speak about how you communicated in the end? Were there any bumps or barriers or exciting sparks of shared experience or shared perspective that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, for me, we had a coffee catch up initially, and Scott sort of just talked all about his the research that he was doing and the application, and I was sort of just the blank canvas, kind of taking in all of the information and just hearing and observing. And then the really exciting part for me was when we got to go and look at all of the slideshows of his research and his data, and actually looking at the data and how that is its own sort of visual language. And that's sort of when I started to see the narrative of how, and I think, you know, as scientists and as artists, we're all just translators trying to translate this different language of things that are kind of intangible, that we don't necessarily have a language for. And so I was just so incredibly excited when I started seeing Scott's data and seeing the sort of the visual landscape that he was creating of information for us to broaden our perspectives. And already so much of his data looked like a lot of the stuff that I'd been studying and observing in my own practice and taking inspiration from, of these aerial perspectives. So I really, I just found that process so incredibly exciting, and to hear, Scott's translations as well, and how cool using AI for you to kind of stitch this mosaic together. That's kind of where I kind of took the composition inspiration from.
And I'm sure your day was made when you heard that, oh, you actually find this data
She wanted
exciting.
to look at my slides.
You're enjoying the slides.
My students are usually trying to get out of the room as fast as they can. I just put it down to all that COVID practice where we had to do everything online. And we were pretty ready for that at UQ, because in agriculture, we'd been teaching online for years, actually. So, because of our remote campus and everything. So, but I was glad you were happy to see that, because I was talking about this in the cafe and going, I need to show you this stuff, and I know you're terribly visual, terribly visual, so I had to show you what it was. But the nice thing was the abstraction, because that's my job. My job is to simplify things somehow. That's what I do. I'm a generalist. I may be a crop physiologist, but my job is to take complex information about how plants grow and turn it into something else, and then predict with that. And that is it. And to go to Janet's point about imposter syndrome, I get that every day, night, non-stop. How do I get to have such a fun job and travel around the world as a scientist and go to art museums. I never miss one. But the abstraction and the discussion about that was fun. But it also touched on two other aspects of science. One is that scientists, we are an artificial intelligence ourselves, because we have this massive network across the world that communicates non-stop, and that is an artificial intelligence in its own. Every one of us is a node, and we're part of that system, and we're exchanging information, and we're making much faster advance than any single genius would ever do. And the second thing I liked about it is that Maddie can just falsify data as much as she likes and put it on a canvas. I can't do that because I'll get caught, and the journal probably won't publish my stuff ever again.
That was my interpretation of
yeah, well, I tried, but
of what the drone was trying.
She
to
can
say.
make an even more beautiful picture by just falsifying a few lines there that I couldn't put in because I didn't have the data. So, no, it's a nice exchange for that.
And how about our Great Barrier Reef collaboration? So I know that you were talking, Emily, about not just the concept, but also the materials you chose. Because Felipe's work is so much about colour and what you can tell from that colour, and also the degradation of the Great Barrier Reef, how is that the moment that you started to see a potential concept play out in your mind when he was talking about those things?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, colours are really, it's a huge aspect of my work. Obviously for most artists it is, but I think I tend to start with colours first. At least I see a pretty clear vision of the palette I want to work with before I start on a work, which is a bit backwards. But with Felipe's work, I think we first really connected on the hyperspectral imagery, which is, so the particular research that Felipe was running with the drones over the Great Barrier Reef, they were able to capture hyperspectral imagery of the stage that the coral was at, and it means that those images have far more visual information than what the human eye is capable of seeing. And so, yeah, immediately I was like struck by that paradox, because as a human, how am I meant to communicate that using colour? But yeah, in terms of materials, I think that's also something I tend to think about quite a lot when producing work. So typically in a lot of street art festivals, there's a focus on materials that have quite a lot of like volatile organic compounds in the paints, or aerosols, which are, once you've used the can, they're in the bin kind of thing. So I usually use a really low VOC paint that is water soluble, and also the actual limited aerosol that I did use was to actually make a comment on aerosols themselves, understanding that over a few years that the vibrancy of that colour would fade and that it's not actually that sustainable. So yeah, kind of putting that as a really big aspect of the work was important to me, maybe more so than the imagery, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, and also a comment on the Great Barrier Reef and colour. Felipe, what do you see when you look at Emily's concept that she's come to you with? What sort of things do you take away from that, or what do you hope the public will?
I think, like the artwork that Emily has created is it's fantastic. The use of the colors that she used to represent this abstract concept of this hyperspectral imagery that is not common to the general public. And what I'm hoping that the public will see is that through visualizing this art, it creates a little bit of more consciousness in people of, as I mentioned earlier, the challenges in the environment, and then maybe some more, from a scientific point of view, is more data. Like we hear comments that the Great Barrier Reef is bleaching, but if we don't know the extent of it, it's harder to make decisions, and politicians to make decisions around that. So it's we're getting much more data, and there's another challenge. It's on itself, like the more data you have, the more artificial intelligence you need, the more computing power you need. So it is a complex thing. But there's I guess by processing the data and understanding, and it's difficult. But I guess what I'm thinking, what Emily has done is interpreting that information and making it a bit more public, and for the public to understand those implications of what is happening in the environment. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much crossover between the different stories that we hear from the street artists and scientists of how to get something that's not visual into the visual, how to get something so abstract that doesn't have any physical form into something that can be translated to each other, let alone to a broader audience. I was wondering if any of you, I might start on this side, would like to talk about what you learnt from this collaboration or what you'll take away from this moving forward.
So just reflecting on the difference between trying to explain what we do, which is so abstract, I was thinking, after I saw the concept, I work with mechanism a lot. So, when you're talking about being aware of the paint, you're aware very much as an artist how you're doing this. And so a lot of the time we're aware of how we're doing it. But what Jan and Scott have done is they've constructed the moment of lived experience of the product. And so that distinction was something that I can't create what they can create, because that's 5-10 years in the future. But they can visualize for the public now possible futures, and then the kind of wonder that you might have interacting with that. So I thought that part of it was really interesting for me, is the difference between, I wouldn't call it falsifying data, I would call it being able to see the future in a way that we can't do as scientists because we're limited to what we can do with the mechanisms we've got at the moment. But an artist can go way beyond what we can do.
And also into what we feel, because I know that there's quite an emotional element to the image of the girl's face and how she's interacting with this social robot and how she's feeling. And it was interesting to hear that you emoted and saw yourself in that, but also that was the artist's intention, that you see yourself in that, and that it's about your feelings as a researcher as well as the end user. Feelings are often kind of kept separate. Damien, as someone else who had, at least a humanoid form, what sort of feelings were you trying to convey through those eyes?
And that bringing a humanness, or while it's kind of an android type character, still bringing a humanness to that, an emotive kind of quality. And I think what you've touched on is really true. As an artist, you really are, using the emotions and speaking to the emotive rather than the intellect, in a way. I guess different artists do that in different ways, but for me, I would almost try to, through my art, avoid, when someone's looking at the work and through their interpretation, avoid the intellect and go straight to the emotion, straight to the heart. And maybe that's something that is more difficult to do within the science realm. So that's a very interesting part of the collaborations.
And Sue, how much is it important that emotions in your work, and when you're doing academic writing, grant writing, you're taking your feelings out of it. In fact, feelings are, get out of this, your feelings shouldn't be in this. That's going to mess with the scientific method. That we don't put feelings in there. But scientists do feel deeply about their research. They do feel deeply about the outcomes of that. How important is it to you that people have a feeling about AI or express their feeling about AI?
Oh, well, it's very important because I think feelings are, if you don't feel something towards it, then you're not engaging. So I think it's critical. But I think we certainly didn't warn our AI researchers that was, you could look at it the reverse way in that, this process also can help scientists to engage more with feelings, which I think is equally important and something that's completely discouraged through our current research organisations where, many people do have a very strong feeling that there's no room for emotion in science, but that actually goes completely against human nature because scientists are human. There will always be an element of emotion in the work that they do, but it's very rarely spoken about. And so in some respects, this project is also shining a light on that.
Yeah, and I think both communities, the arts community and the science research community, have been heavily hit by the pandemic over the last year, have lost opportunities, people have lost jobs and income. There's a lot of feeling in both of these communities, which is, about the work. What does it mean to you artists to be able to do a Brisbane Street Art Festival, in a global pandemic? How have you actually found going from jet setting around the world, for instance, and being able to go to lots of festivals? How have you found that's changed the community and your kind of perception going into this year's Street Art Festival? It's a big question, so anyone can take it. You don't have to have an answer for that.
Changed a little bit from a couple of years ago. Obviously, the biggest thing being capacity, but being at the airport was quite strange because, last year so many opportunities were pulled from the table because of the impact of COVID, and a huge part of my livelihood was threatened, and it was a really big struggle, and I know that that's not unique, so to have an opportunity to be back in that space again was really nice, but also felt a bit strange. And I don't know if it's just me catching up with the rest of the world, but just seeing the sheer amount of people that were back at the domestic airport was a little unsettling, to be honest. Because, it was only a couple of months ago that we were in lockdown, and the effects of what's currently a global pandemic affecting other countries in the most profound and horrible way it almost just seems like everyone's a bit too keen to get back to normal. It's been a bit strange.
Yeah, and it's okay if normal is not the same thing. In fact, I don't think it can be. So, I'm really excited that we get to be in this space together. But let's all just remember that we're also very lucky to be in this space together, and in this place, not just Brisbane, but in Australia, especially given what's happening everywhere. So I just wanted to take a moment to point that out and say thanks so much for coming along, everyone. We've only got 5 more minutes to go. I'd love to hear any questions, and also from all of you, if you have any questions for each other as well. I know that it's been a great sharing of experiences across the way. Yes?
You might have already told me this, but I wasn't ready for it. Who birthed this project and who put who with who?
It's been a collaboration. So this is a collaboration between the AI Hub and the Street Art Festival. But I think Lincoln Savage has been instrumental in knowing the different street artists, and the AI Hub knew the different researchers, and there was kind of a discussion between the Street Art Festival and the AI Hub about each of the works and the matching. Did you want to talk to that, Sue, about the matching of people together?
Yeah, we were trying to look for a diversity of applications of artificial intelligence, and so I think we were able to achieve that. So Janet's work really has a very human element in terms of looking at those language technologies and the work she does. Particularly with First Nations people, and then we really were very keen to find someone who was applying it to agriculture, because we knew we had a spot at the RNA showgrounds. So Scott was a fantastic fit for that, and Felipe's work with the environment, we think has that. Can really speak to everybody, so it was very fortunate. I mean, so it was also, I guess, a little bit around the space that was available too. It made sense to have something about the Great Barrier Reef at the airport. It made sense to have something on agriculture. And then it was really just a matter of using our local networks to identify which AI researchers, we knew who were doing things in that area, and which ones we thought were good sports as well.
Yeah, maybe some AI researchers who are going to play nicely with the street artists. But also, it is interesting, having been on the other side, having paired scientists and street artists together as that node in the middle, not knowing whether you put people together because it's a challenge to both of them and they're really looking for something that pushes them outside of the type of art they're used to doing or the type of communication they're used to doing, or whether you go, oh, that person already loves to paint X that looks like the graphs and diagrams from this person's work. And there are so many different ways you could do it. I'm sure we could mix everyone up and do the same people involved but different pairings and have a totally different outcome. Any other questions? Comments, feelings?
So the scientists who've been involved in the collaboration are responsible for the next generation of scientists that are coming through. They all have students. So I'm wondering if they'd care to comment on how this interaction with their artists might have an impact on how they interact with students or how they might talk to students.
Yeah, is there any learning from this for student interaction?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I think part of the journey or part of our communication from the research point of view is that translating to some young audience today as well, and how we can communicate. And there's maybe different ways of communicating that information. The Street Art Festival is a good opportunity for the general public and young public to have a look at those expressions and start questioning about what are the possibilities of AI, what are the challenges, and maybe some of the connotations and implications of it. So we do that at the university level, engaging with the students. They come to some study tours, or they spend a week or a day at the universities, and we give them an experience of on our side is very technical from an engineering perspective, but ways of communicating to more general public and more general audiences and young audiences is a great opportunity, definitely.
Yeah, and I've heard researchers who've been involved in collaborations say that they thought they were really great at explaining their work, and then they got such a shock when the street artist was like, "No, not getting it." So there's also sometimes that sort of learning, which is important. Did you have something to add, Janet?
Yeah, so I'm in the Human-Centred Computing group at University of Queensland. So the people in my group are quite diverse anyway. We have people who are singers and dancers and performers and do all sorts of things. And quite often we're told now to look for the story, and we do a lot teaching our students the story. But one of the things you see in certainly the artwork that we've seen in these murals is that it doesn't have to be the story. It can be the question or the moment or the what visual will grab someone's attention. And so one of the things I would love to ask the artists in the audience is, how would you visualise AI? And is there an opportunity to keep this collaboration going between the universities and the artists to maybe help our students go through that process so that you don't get another generation of people like us, but you get a generation of the people who are sort of halfway between, who know something about how to showcase their ideas through a visual mural to connect with that emotion, as Damien was saying, but also to be trying to get a particular concept across, which is one of the things we try and do when we're trying to teach.
Yeah, it's communicating that concept is still something that has to happen, even if the concept couldn't be communicated in the artwork for your work. It's still something that has to happen for the students in the room, doesn't it?
So, we have a lot of responsibility to train the next generation. It's something that I get kept awake at night by a lot of things. That's another one. Because you want that work to continue. Science is a body of work that has to keep going, and you need to work out how to replace that. And so I hope that we may need a slight explanatory plaque next to your beautiful abstract, Madeline, but I hope we can inspire people to keep thinking about that. I think one of the things I'm trying hard to do in teaching agriculture or having roles in that, and my course doesn't happen till third year, so people don't get exposed to the way I handle data and analyse and interpret until third year. And I've been trying to inject more of my stuff into some first year subjects and things, but it's about people, students, being very aware of data and analytics and just the concepts that are there that we can learn a lot more, and just having the basics of those, because all of our jobs are going to require some of that basics in the future. They require it now. I mean, we have massive demand for agriculture students right now, but we want people who have data analytics, and they don't realise necessarily. So they come in, and we need to actually tell the students that. And these are students who've come through, grown up with phones, and they handle AI continuously in their hand. But when we go and talk to them, we don't necessarily translate how much of that is actually part of your future. It's part of your career, your opportunities, and that includes if you're an artist, for that matter. I mean, Madeline did you beautiful mock-up on your Apple, I'm sure. So, that having all of the skills and technologies to do that are important as well. And I might add that I told the Gatton campus director that I had this opportunity that Sue had given us to do a wall at the RNA Showgrounds, and Anne told me, we've got a wall at Gatton, so we're absolutely open to painting something else there. So maybe someone out here might want to help us with that, or maybe we'll get a composite wall. I don't know how we'll work it out, but
the Brisbane Street Art Festival.
Yeah, that's right. The UQ Gatton Campus Festival. That's right. We got a lot of walls out there.
Yeah. I mean, silos are a great example of a regional
silo art
canvas
is a
that's been
thing.
taken advantage of.
Well,
more
there's
and
a whole career in silo painting. We've got a lot of silos in this country.
In fact, some of the first ones that got painted probably due for a repaint. So get out there.
That's my one concern, and I haven't asked Stu that question. How long are the RNA going to let us keep that wall? They're not going to paint over it next year, are they? Oh, good.
Yeah, it's a hard question too, as far as street art and the culture of street art as well, because street art in the public space is something that does have people add to it, change it, go over it, and I'm sure that's a whole other panel discussion we could do about legitimising and delegitimising certain types of art and how they evolve or whether they disappear, and is that part of it? But we're taking photos and videos, so hopefully no matter what, things will be immortalised in the ether, thanks to AI. Well, I think that's all we unfortunately have time for. I just want to thank our panel, so please join me in thanking our panel for sharing some of their experience. And thank you all for coming along and having a look at the panel, but also hopefully you'll have a look at the artworks. Some of them are completed. Yours out at the airport is completed, but others are just beginning. Make sure that you have a look in the guides and check out where to see them. Take a look at them. It can even be fun to see them in different forms because you often don't get to see the initial layering that happens. And we've got a great actual video of Damien's taking shape where you can see all the different layers that happen. So thank you again for coming along, and I hope this has just sparked an initial bit of curiosity, whether it's about the street artists behind the street art or the researchers behind the research applications. Thanks for coming along and being a great audience. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Lee.